Right, so the preparation and consumption of food is a recurring idea in the novel. Discuss how this idea is presented. So clearly here the key words are preparation and consumption of food, and then the presentation of that, how this idea is presented. Now there's hardly a page on the novel that doesn't have some sort of reference to preparation and consumption of food, so it's tied up with everything. Right, let's look at some of the essential features of the way the novel's told, of Nervous Conditions. Now, your writing needs to show an understanding that Nervous Conditions is a Bildungsroman. That is the German term for a novel which describes the coming of age of a young person, usually because of some fortunate experience that they've had. Now, traditionally, the Bildungsroman was about a young boy. Now, Tambo certainly is not a boy, but perhaps Dangarembga is deliberately subverting the traditional Bildungsroman a little bit. Absolutely crucial in any discussion of Nervous Conditions is the understanding that we have a first-person narrator. Tambo tells the story, and she is the main character in the story.
You want to say something funny?
Now, it's also worth remembering that there are two Tambos in the story, really. There's the younger Tambo, who tells things as they happen with great immediacy, and the older Tambo, who looks back philosophically and sometimes satirically at those same events. You also need to say something about the use of interior monologue. Most of the novel consists of Tambo's thoughts, deep interior thoughts being presented to us. And there's irony in that quite often the reader is in receipt of information that some of the other characters won't have. There's also quite a lot of direct speech, and Tambo presents characters' actual words and leaves it up to us to make of them what we want. And then also it's worth remembering that Dangarembga is essentially a filmmaker, and quite a few scenes in the novel could be storyboards for the documentary films that she makes. But let's have a look at some of these issues around the preparation and consumption of food. We'll be looking at the tuck shop in a little bit more detail later. Essentially, the contrast between the homestead and the mission is signalled by the consumption and preparation of food. The consumption and preparation of food also adds to the development of the main themes, the oppression of women, and the colonial oppression that Tambo is forced to live in, as well as the lure of the Englishness, and the Western way of cooking and preparing food is central to that. There's also the hint of the force of capitalism, the commercial element coming into the preparation and consumption of food, usually to the detriment of the people consuming it. And you may also want to refer to the fact that the novel is about Tambo's journey from childhood to adulthood. Right, the tuck shops. The tuck shops, they drink Fanta, and it's a Western capitalist form of providing food. And Tambo's description of the less industrious youth began to loiter around the tuck shops. And you think about the choice of the word loiter, and there's a suggestion of something a bit degenerate about these people. And then the bread and tea and jam and sugar and cooking oil listed for us as suddenly these things have become essentials. This again, the satiric voice of the older Tambo looking back. It links a little bit with the tea strainer, which was another essential which had suddenly developed, that appeared in the life of Baba Mukuru and Maiguru. Right, let's return to this idea of the homestead and the mission, the contrast between those two being central. At the homestead, they eat sadza, which is traditional porridge cooked in a pot on an open fire. The women prepare the food. They usually prepare it by crushing the mealies themselves, making their own flour, and then cooking it up into a thick porridge which is eaten with the hands. So essentially it's subsistence economy sorts of eating. You grow the food and you prepare it and you eat it. In the Western world of the mission, the servant Anna does most of the preparation of the food, and they ring a bell when it's time for the next course to be brought in. So that's very much the colonial way, and it's as if Maiguru and Baba Mukuru have absorbed that way of eating. The tea and cakes, and there are quite a few specific quotations you might want to use to describe that particular presentation of that particular scene where Tambu has her first tea party. Most important is, and we'll reflect on this later again, is the instant gravy that Nyasha makes, the stuff out of a packet, which is tasteless and Tambu finds quite horrible. And in the kitchen in the mission, Tambu refers to the enamel and plastic nature of the various things in there. Both the homestead and the mission have a ritualistic element of eating, that the men eat first, and then the women then, and then the children last. However, in the mission, Tambu upsets that. She takes her food before her father, Baba Mukuru, and she doesn't want it to get cold, she says, and that does create quite a lot of tension around the table. Right, let's go back to the gravy that we were talking about in the last slide. Great hunks of meat wallowing in gravy. Now that's on the mission. Sorry, that is at the homestead. That is the food that's been prepared for Baba Mukuru's welcome. And wallowing is that sense of plenty. If something's wallowing, there's lots of it. And great hunks of meat. Again, there's an image there of great hunks, big chunks of food. There's no shortage for anybody. And then the girls, ironically, Tambu, who's done all the cooking, by the time that it's her turn to eat, there's nothing left except the gravy. But the gravy was good, and there was plenty of it. And like the great hunks of meat, there's a suggestion there of plenty of very basic, wholesome food. Compare that with the thick, white, tasteless gravy that Nyasha makes at the mission. And there's a strong contrast, the symbol of the gravy. The contrast between the mission and the homestead is very strong there. Let's look at a few quotations that illustrate this difference between the homestead and the mission and the consumption of food. Firstly, Tambu has her first meal at the mission, and she eats with a knife and fork for the first time until my guru sends to the kitchen for sadza. But after the meal, Tambu looks back and says, "My place looked as though a small and angry child had been fed there." Now, small and angry child, this is the older Tambu thinking back. And the choice of the adjective angry is interesting, because although she's talking about the description of the place where she ate, this novel has a great deal of anger in it, and Tambu and Nyasha become very angry children as the nervous conditions envelops them. There's also a description of cooking at the homestead, where the women sit around the fire chatting to aunts and cousins. We waited for the sadza to thicken. There's that lovely image of the porridge thickening gradually as the women and the children gather around, and there's a sense of community and a sense of communal creation of the food, very different to Anna in the kitchen at the mission. And then a very important quotation where Tambu returns, having had her experience at the mission, goes back to the homestead, and for breakfast she gets bread and margarine, and she tells us, "I would have preferred eggs and bacon." And of course eggs and bacon are associated very strongly with traditional English breakfast food, as opposed to the bread and margarine, which is the African breakfast. So in summary, preparation and consumption of food is absolutely central to much of the business of the novel. It adds to the richness of the setting. We have lots of Shona words used to describe the food and the preparation of, and that setting the food is linked to that creation of setting. It adds to the development of themes, and it tracks Tambu's journey to self-awareness. And it's quite striking in this novel that as you read it and reread it, the number of times that the preparation and consumption of food is referred to.